Good evening, friends. Let us start by offering the Sunday congregational prayer. The words will be shown on the video screen. We offer our salutations to the all-loving being who endows all beings with consciousness. We meditate on the Lord, who is the origin of the universe. Lord, thou abidest in all, thou art all, thou assumest all forms, thou art the origin and goal of all, thou art the self of all, thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss. Salutations unto thee. May the world be peaceful, may the wicked become gentle, may all creatures think of mutual welfare, may their minds be occupied with what is spiritual and abiding. May our hearts be immersed in selfless love for the Lord. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. In honor of the birth anniversary of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the opening song tonight will be Chant Unceasingly the Name of the Lord.
Unceasingly the
Dear friends, it is the privilege of the Vedanta Society of Providence to have a distinguished guest speaker this evening. She's actually a familiar face. We have known her a long time. She participated in and was a member of the planning board when we built this new extension back in 2012. She is a devotee of Indian classical music and an accomplished singer. And she has spoken here on other occasions, so she is a familiar face. Her chosen topic for tonight is Essence of Compassion. Please welcome Professor Donna Maurer.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for coming here today, and I want to thank Swami Yogamanandaji for asking me to come and speak here. Thanks, Chet, for that nice introduction. And it's great to be here in Providence today. I live up in Arlington, Massachusetts, where it's actually even a little colder than it is here. So it seems it's not quite spring yet. And anyway, so for today, I want to talk about a topic that is very dear to my heart, and I feel it's very practical for all of us, especially today when we find that the world is in so much apparent turmoil, and it's full of change, and everywhere we look, we can see that it seems like the world is full of suffering. And so the question is, what can we do, and what should we do? We can see all this worldly drama playing out as if it were on a screen in front of us. But at the same time, we're a part of that drama too. And so what are our responsibilities as actors in this play of life? And in thinking about these questions, we also have an opportunity to think about how we might better both ourselves and the world in which we live. We also want to think about how to become more whole and more liberated from our selfishness and self-centeredness. And so today we're going to talk about a practical and a spiritual, that is, practical and spiritual conjoined together aspect of human life. And obviously from the title, it's compassion. And the title of today's talk is Essence of Compassion. And that's what, when Swamiji and I talked about this some time ago, that's the title that we came up with. But preparing the talk, it became clear to me that a more appropriate title would be The Essence, Practice, and Perils of Compassion. And so we'll be addressing the essence, practice, and the perils in that order. And then at the end, we'll discuss how we might think about overcoming some of the perils, so that we can grow and evolve and improve in our lives. So first, the essence of compassion. And I do these titles for Charlie, who's writing the summary of the talk today. I can easily follow along, hopefully. So when thinking about compassion, we immediately run into an important issue. And that is, in its ultimate sense, compassion is an ideal. It's an ideal that is actually beyond the human scope. For example, when we say that a particular person is compassionate, it's only in a limited sense. And the reason that it's in a limited sense is because the compassion that we practice presumes a subject, that is, the person who is being compassionate, and an object, the person or other being who is the recipient of the compassion. In this type of compassion, there's an ego involved. There's a sense of I and you. At its essence, however, there is no I or you in compassion. Rather, it's a state of being that we can associate with the great saints and sages. And at its essence, compassion is a state of oneness. As Swami Bhajananda explains in his book titled The Light of the Modern World, the universal influence of Sri Ramakrishna, he wrote, quote, "True compassion is a higher type of feeling for suffering people, which spontaneously arises in the hearts of fully illumined saints and avatars. We see this in the lives of Buddha, Jesus, Ramakrishna, and others. Swami Bhajananda goes on to say that Sri Ramakrishna's life was one of supreme sacrifice for the welfare of humanity, and that Sri Ramakrishna had tremendous concern for the welfare of other people. From early in the morning to late at night, Sri Ramakrishna spent most of his time advising, guiding, inspiring, and awakening the people who thronged to him. His spiritual consort, Sri Sarda Devi, whom we call Holy Mother, also embodies the spirit of true compassion. Her capacity to adapt to various situations and people with extremely different personality types was driven out of love and compassion, and not out of the desire for any particular outcomes. Simply, she emanated love and compassion for all, and she demonstrated this ideal of compassion through her actions. There are many examples of how Holy Mother expressed her combination of guileless innocence with a savvy understanding of how to relate to others in ways that would best serve everyone involved in a particular situation. My favorite memorable instance, though, occurred when Holy Mother found herself traveling alone in the wilderness after separating from her group. She was confronted by a man and a woman who intended to rob her. Many of you perhaps know this story. And rather than scream and run away from her robbers, Holy Mother appealed to them simply, trustingly, and fearlessly, as though they were her parents. Holy Mother treated the would-be robbers so authentically that they responded in kind to her, consoling her as if she were their own daughter. They saw that she was tired and hungry, and so they took her to a local village where they gave her some refreshments and then protected her while she slept. The next day, her original traveling companions met her in the village, where Sarda introduced the couple as her new father and mother. These were the people who were intending to rob her. The couple then came several times to visit Holy Mother and Sri Ramakrishna, who knew the whole story and treated them as if they were his own family. Now, one might think that Holy Mother's actions were shrewd and calculated, that she had outwitted her potential assailants. I feel, though, that her actions were in no way deceptive. Rather, in the moment, she truly regarded the robbers as her caretakers. She regarded them as her own, with no fear, just with love. As she admonishes us to regard the whole world as her own, the robbers were indeed no strangers to her. As a result of Holy Mother's compassion in treating the would-be robbers as instead her would-be caretakers, these two individuals experienced a transformation of character. It's a rather unusual story of compassion, but it well conveys how compassion can have lasting impacts when it is pure and when it touches the lives of individuals in a profound way. We might think that the would-be robbers were being compassionate to Holy Mother, but indeed it was her compassion toward them that transformed the situation. Holy Mother's human life was characterized by a multitude of complex interpersonal relationships in which she used a direct, simple approach without regard for her own benefit. And her love and compassion still shines forth in the many reported instances of how she touched each person who crossed her path according to his or her individual circumstance. In his talk on Religion is Self-Abnegation, Swami Vivekananda explained how true compassion is oneness. He said, "Knowledge and happiness lead to freedom, but not one can attain liberty until every being, including ants and dogs," and yes, he said, including ants and dogs, has liberty. Not one can be happy until all are happy. When you hurt anyone, you hurt yourself, for you and your brother are one. He indeed is a yogi who sees himself in the whole universe and the whole universe in himself. Self-sacrifice not self-assertion, is the law of the highest universe. The key in the lives of holy people is their readiness to engage in self-sacrifice for the highest good. This readiness, though, is a state of being, not just a state of mind. Readiness is a state of purity in which the ego is uninvolved, and this readiness for self-sacrifice then plays out through action. So, from my understanding, perhaps we can talk about compassion as having two levels. One level is the compassion on the level of Sri Ramakrishna and other saints and sages. And I call it a level, but it's not really a level. I mean, at this level, compassion is pervasive. And the other level is compassion on the level of everyday people like you and me. And for our convenience, we can maybe distinguish between them as compassion with a big C and compassion with a small c. And this isn't a scientific distinction, but rather a distinction we can use so that we don't end up confusing the ideal of compassion with the human quality of compassion, which of course is very important and valuable, but the human compassion is tainted with the ego, with tinges of the ego. So today's talk, we want to continuously keep the ideal of compassion in our awareness as that to which we aspire and that we venerate as a perfection of holy beings. Again, we don't want to confuse our personal efforts to become more compassionate with compassion in its perfect state. They're related, but they're not the same. We need to honor the ideal of compassion and use its manifestations as examples as how we aspire to be, to think, and act in our daily lives. So let's talk about the practice of compassion. In the field of psychology, compassion is defined as a moral force and a response to others' pain. We can think of compassion as including both a feeling, and the feeling we can call empathy, and an action. Empathy means being able to understand others from their perspective. Empathy is a natural human trait, and almost everybody has some concern for other people. And there are very few exceptions, but empathy is always there, at least almost, that it can arise in a person. And an action can take many forms. It can be an action intended for the benefit of another individual. It could be an action intended to benefit the community or the world. And it doesn't have to be a physical action. For example, a person may feel concerned about another and think well of the person or pray for him or her. Or it can be actions that simply take place for those that we cross paths with in life. Or action can take the form of social action and nonviolent protest. So there are all different types of actions that can be involved. Again, compassion involves both the feeling of empathy, and that's important, as we'll see later, because sometimes people act and they have no empathy, and they look like they're doing good, but there's no feeling behind it. So we wouldn't call that compassion. And it's also important to recognize that we can't quantify compassion. As I mentioned earlier, we can keep a distinction between the ideal, the perfect compassion, and perfect compassion. We can also imagine that there's a wide range of extents of compassion, depending on the degree to which the ego is involved. So this means, in my view, that we can't meaningfully evaluate the extent of another person's compassion. We can't know what's going behind the scenes within the person that's driving his or her actions. In addition, we need to recognize that any actions that we take to help are likely to have negative consequences for someone else. In other words, we have a feeling for others, we see suffering that we want to alleviate because we have this feeling of empathy. We want to take an action, but once we take an action, it's going to help some people, and it might have just the opposite effect for other people. And I'll give you a really simple example from my own life. A while back, where I live in Arlington, Mass, it's a busy intersection. The town very unexpectedly completely changed the pedestrian and traffic configuration, so that all of a sudden it was extremely dangerous for all pedestrians. And in that area, there are a lot of people who have different issues with mobility, people who have visual impairments. There are a lot of little kids, right? And so a lot of people were being put at risk because of the situation. And so a group of us in the neighborhood got together out of concern, caring for all these individuals affected, to try to change this in our neighborhood. But that was a great idea. But at the same time, as the Board of Selectmen told us, well, we did this to help manage the traffic better so that people can move through the intersection faster in their vehicles, right? So everything is sort of, you want to do one good for one person or one group of people, and unfortunately they did consider that the risk to pedestrian outweighed the benefit of faster traffic. But people who were driving their cars, some of them were not happy about it. So you can't, and of course you feel empathy for them too. It's like, oh, I'm sorry that this is taking you longer, but there was no solution that was going to make everybody happy. Anyway, that's a very, I'm sure you can all think of examples of this kind of thing in your own life, when you've tried to be of assistance to someone else and it ended up being a problem for another person. And we also find that the time that we take to help one person may be time taken away from others. And the nature of human action is that it invariably has both negative and positive consequences. So how can we decide when and where to express our compassion? According to Swami Vivekananda, he said, "The only way to rise is by doing the duty next to us, and thus gathering strength, go on until we reach the highest state." This purifying function of compassion is expressed in the Vyada Gita, which is a part of the Mahabharata. And so some of you might be familiar with this parable or story, and I'm just going to share part of the story that's relevant. There's a whole second part that has a different meaning. So here's the story as told by Swami Vivekananda. A young sannyasin went into a forest, and there he meditated, worshipped, and practiced yoga for a long time. After years of hard work and practice, he was one day sitting under a tree when some dry leaves fell on his head. He looked up, and he saw a crow and a crane fighting on the top of the tree. You know the story? Which made him very angry. He looked up, saw the crow, saw the crane, they were fighting, dropping leaves on his head. And so this yogi who had practiced for a long time said, "What dare you throw these dry leaves on my head?" And with these words, he looked up at them angrily, and a flash of fire went out of his head. And with these, and such was his power that immediately burnt the birds. He burnt the birds to ashes. And he actually almost felt kind of glad, because he was like, wow, I have developed this great power. That he had so much power that he could burn these birds just through his anger. So after a little time, he went to the town to beg for his bread, which was what the sannyasins were doing. And he went and he stood at a door. And he said, at the door, he said, "Mother, give me food." And a voice came from inside the house saying, "Wait a little, my son." And the young man thought, this is again the yogi, the young man who had burnt the birds. He thought, "You wretched woman, how dare you make me wait? You don't know my power yet." And while he was thinking this, a voice came again from another room. "Boy, don't be thinking too much of yourself. Here, there is neither crow nor crane." And he was astonished. He had to wait. And at last the woman came out, and he fell at her feet and said, "Mother, "How did you know that?" And she said, "My boy, I don't know your yoga or your practices. I'm a common everyday woman. I made you wait because my husband is ill and I was nursing him. All my life, I've struggled to do my duty. When I was unmarried, I did duty to my parents. Now that I'm married, I do duty to my husband. That is all the yoga I practice. But by doing my duty, I have become illumined. Thus, I could read your thoughts and know what you had done in the forest." So, the process of changing our thoughts and actions also changes us. There is no dearth of opportunities to act, and we can act on whatever we are presented with every day, because there are really endless opportunities to feel for other people and to act on those feelings in a positive way, however it comes up in the moment. And Jesus also provided a wonderful exemplar of how to be compassionate, as expressed in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Again, anybody not hear of the parable of the Good Samaritan before? It's pretty common. It's almost you've not heard it. See, yeah. So it almost becomes something you'll say. Oh, you'll hear it in conversation sometimes. Oh, he was such a good Samaritan. I was like, what does that mean? Okay, it's based on this story, and it's from the New Testament. It's a succinct and expressive reminder of how love and actions are interconnected at the highest level. So for that reason, I'd like to share it. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" The law expert answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus said. "Do this, and you shall live." But then the law expert asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And so too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" Jesus asked. The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." A key aspect of compassion at the highest level is that it is not self-seeking. There's no reward for the effort, and it's a natural, spontaneous giving out of love. Compassion has a certain guilelessness about it. It's not based on a rational calculation of what's being received in return. And when we see someone taking this guileless and non-calculating approach to loving and serving others, it can really stand out to us. And that person can serve as a role model to us. Perhaps you can think of someone in your own life who you've seen that embodies the spirit of compassion, empathy and compassion. And again, we can't know all the dynamics of a person's compassion, but certain people seem to invoke a spirit of compassion through their words and actions. We might even read about and watch such people in the news. Sometimes there are these human interest stories in the news, which they're relatively rare, but when they happen, they're much appreciated because to counteract all the bad news that's out there. And so one such positive news story in the Washington Post was especially moving to me. A 71-year-old Catholic priest, Rene Robert, had been murdered in April 2016. He had been shot to death by someone whom he had been helping, a man he'd met while doing service at a local prison. And after Father Robert was murdered, a local sheriff who had known the priest for 30 years said, this is what the sheriff said about the priest. The sheriff said he had warned the priest on several occasions about helping people. The sheriff said, not that it was wrong to help, but you got to be smart about it. He saw, that is, the priest saw the good in too many people, and he paid for it with his life. Now, not only did Father Robert give and help others without worrying for himself, but also decades prior, he had signed an advance directive, that is, a document stating the actions he wanted taken during and after his death. In his advance directive, he stated the following. Again, this was 20 years before he was murdered. He had written, I hereby declare that should I die as a result of a violent crime, I request that the person or persons found guilty of homicide for my killing not be subject to or put in jeopardy of the death penalty under any circumstances, no matter how heinous the crime or how much I have suffered. And thus, in death as in life, Father Robert exhibited his compassion through his actions. How he would even come to think of this, of writing this in his advance directive, is a mystery to me. I'd never thought of that. That he would think in advance of someone who might harm him and the compassion that he would extend to that person, I find to be both moving and inspiring. And we don't know where kindness will take us in this life. We don't know when the end will come. But we can look to people like Father Robert for inspiration on how to be brave and self-effacing at the same time. And this then brings us to some of the perils of compassion. When we think about potential perils associated with our efforts to act compassionately, we can see that they are all, in some way or another, associated with the ego. In other words, that there are perils at all simply reflects some self-interest and that there's some aspect of ourselves that's out of balance. So I want to discuss these perils because they can point to some of our limitations and then lead us through introspection to think about how we might overcome them. Altogether, we'll talk about 6 possible perils. No, there may be many more. The first 2 perils are obstacles to acting compassionately in the first place, while the others are perils that are associated with ego involvement in our efforts to act compassionately. And for these first 2 obstacles, they're not excuses for not acting compassionately, rather they're barriers to be overcome. So it's helpful to understand them. And also, understanding these obstacles can enhance our empathy for other people when we see them struggling with their actions. So the first peril or obstacle to acting compassionately that we might consider is indifference or inertia. And this might take the form of simply not caring. We tend to think of ourselves as being at the center of the universe and let our own problems consume us. Indifference can also stem from lacking energy in general. Someone who is in a very tamasic or lethargic state will have difficulty experiencing empathy, never mind acting on their empathic feelings. A psychological study published several years ago found that, quote, individuals who are high on empathic concern and low on personal distress are more likely to take actions for the benefit of others than for their own benefit. In other words, people who are drowning in their personal distress face a serious obstacle in enacting compassion. Also, this obstacle might come from a feeling of simply being overwhelmed by all the suffering in the world, or even all the suffering within one's own family, one's own social circle, and work environment. When there are so many problems and so many people suffering, one might just give up, and in the process lose empathy for others. And this relates to one of the other perils I'll talk about a little bit later, called compassion fatigue. A second peril or obstacle that I'm going to talk about is fear. I think the fear is a huge obstacle to acting compassionately. We might fear that our action to help another person might be unwelcome. We might even worry about insulting the person. We might fear that we're not doing the right thing or the best thing to assuage another person's pain. We might fear what other people say about us if we speak out about something like an injustice. And we might even fear retribution from the person that we're assisting. When we act with kindness, we don't know what the outcome will be. And we often read stories of a person who assists, for example, assists a motorist, a stranded motorist, and they end up getting hit by a car, or they end up getting robbed. And so we could even end up getting killed through our compassionate action, like the priest that we spoke about. And the fear of any of these things happening might keep us from acting. And so the other perils, so-called perils, are associated with the ego involvement in action itself. And so the third peril is, and of course, these are just my categorizations. I had to limit them, so I came up with 6, but I'm sure there are a lot more. I just tried to think of the different ways, all the different obstacles that can come up for people. So again, you might think of more, and I'd be more than happy to find out what you think about them. But the third peril is pride. Our ego can get puffed up when we take positive actions, and especially if we're rewarded for those actions. If we're awarded or if people compliment us and we receive praise for what we do, it's easy to get caught up in the pride of that. And it can be a significant peril because it can have exactly the opposite effect of what we want if we're engaging in compassion, it's in part to purify ourselves and to purify our own minds. Pride is going to have a negative effect on that, obviously. And the fourth peril is expectations. There are different kinds of expectations, but their commonality is that we become disappointed or angry when things don't go the way we want. And again, this is a hint to us regarding our self-interest involved in action. Sometimes we may make efforts to help others and we get rejected. Sometimes the help that we offer other people isn't even needed and can cause more problems. For example, one thing I think of is a lot of times people want to take all their stuff that they don't want anymore and donate it, which is a really great thing, but in the process, when you donate stuff, it actually might not even ever get to the person or the organization or whatever that can benefit from it. And we might expect that, oh, this is going to do a lot of good, but it might not, and we might not get recognized for it. Also, there can be expectations that arise about reciprocation. And this is a big one. I think it's sort of a hidden thing that can happen with people in their own minds. If they've given something, they expect at least something in return, even if it's just a smile or a thank you. It might be also expectations for reciprocation of like giving something back. Then giving becomes much more like a business arrangement of some kind, right? Sometimes you'll even hear people say, and I have to say, I've heard it it's something that you hear commonly. I'll say that. It's like, you'll hear people say, after all I did for that person, the least they could have done is blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like people are expecting, and even if they thought they were being very giving, there's still something in the back of their mind that was expecting something back. Okay, the fifth peril of acting compassionately, and I think this is a really big one, is that when we are making efforts to help other people, we might develop negative feelings about the people who we perceive as impeding our actions. In other words, we might kind of find ourselves discriminating among those we want to help and not help, and we might end up demonizing anyone or anything that seems to obstruct our path and to do what we think is right. And we can develop a sort of us versus them mentality. So for example, we might develop, have empathic feelings about a particular group of people that we feel, we might be able to do something to be helpful for. But then we might see other people who are, impeding those actions that we're trying to make, and that can generate a lot of negativity. And certainly, there's a lot of this going on in the world right now. So, and you can see a lot of the anger that this is bringing up in people. What it can do is it can end up causing people or leading people to feel more angry than caring. And this anger, if this happens and you're helping someone and you feel impeded, you're angry, this can become a real festering anger that then can damage both us and the other actions that we'd like to take. And then the last one is compassion fatigue, which people in the human services often hear about. There's a lot of research on this topic, particularly, again, people working in human services. And part of the reason, again, is perhaps because there's so much suffering in the world. And when one form of suffering has been ameliorated, there are endless other forms of suffering existing after that. And we can see that alleviating one type of suffering just goes on to reveal another kind. And even within our families and in our small social circles, we can sometimes find ourselves overwhelmed by people's needs and sometimes their demands. And this peril of compassion fatigue can be compounded if we see ourselves as being indispensable. People may begin to rely on our kindness, which make us feel that we are the only ones that can help them. And so not only may this puff up the ego, but it also can lead us to just be taking actions and losing our feelings of empathy. Acting for the sake of acting or simply acting out of obligation with no feeling of empathy can lead to resentment, indifference, and anger. So, those are a lot of possible perils. We can see how easy it is for our pride, our self-interest, or our indifference to get in the way of our good impulses, to be sincere and wholehearted in our motivations and actions. So in the remaining time, we'll have my ideas for today. I'm almost done with those, and then there'll be a few minutes for questions. But I just wanted to take a few more minutes to discuss ways in which we might overcome or at least attenuate these perils and learn to act more compassionately. One is that we can work on eliminating the obstacles to our compassion. We can work towards being more guileless and nurture a spirit of goodwill within ourselves that extends to everyone. We can work on replacing negative thoughts with positive ones and finding our own faults rather than the faults of others. So working on the obstacles and paying attention to when selfishness is guiding us can really help us towards expanding our capacity to serve others. And as well, it would be helpful to work on developing an attitude of empathy towards oneself, too. The second thing is we can work on viewing our actions as serving God, or for those people who don't have a belief in a personal God, view our actions as serving the highest good, not ourselves. Relatedly, we can work on not being attached to the outcomes of our actions and focus on, instead, the means by which we are engaging in our actions. In other words, we can engage in an inner experience of renunciation.
And the third thing is that we can understand that we are all just participants in this drama of life. And we can know that life is fluid and changing, and that our capacity to help others is always also changing. As Swami Vivekananda stated, if you can stretch out a helping hand, do so. If you cannot, fold your hands, bless your brothers, and let them go their own way. So sometimes help may be needed and we can't help. But at a minimum, we can wish others well and do no harm. Regardless of what we can or cannot do, we can always offer kindness and empathy, even to those whom we perceive as obstructing our efforts to help others. So these are the challenges that we face and how we might think about addressing them. Through all of this, we can look to the exemplars of compassion in its complete ideal state, as well as those who personify it to various extents in their daily life. May we all grow and evolve in our capacity to feel empathy for others and to act on this feeling in a loving, non-attached way. Thank you very much. And so I would be happy to address any questions that anybody has, or if you have any comments. As I mentioned, these are just some ideas that I have, and I'd like to continue thinking about them, so any input would be great. Yes, Charlie?
I was in a group in college that it came out a couple of years afterwards that the FBI was spying on the group. And I still have daydreams to this very day, almost on a daily basis, about one of the guys who I think might have been a spy who was saying he was my friend. And how do I stop? How do I have compassion and not think about that old? I should probably ask Swami Yoganandaji about this, but do you have any ideas?
It's very difficult when you have angry feelings that stem from actions that have taken place in the past. One, again, I think talking to Swami Yoganandaji is a good idea, but at the same time, okay, I'll share with you one thing that I do. That may be a better way to address it. And this is when I find myself being really annoyed by somebody or have thoughts about somebody, angry feelings of something from the past, is I take a moment and I mentally bless that person. I ask for a blessing of that person. And that helps at least sort of neutralize. I mean, it's still a good idea to work on what the source of the anger is, maybe, but in the moment when it's happening, because importantly, you don't want to have the anger affecting you.
Yeah.
You know, and so by blessing a person, or by blessing, it also be just, it can be just having a good thought for the person. Can be, this can be hard. It's imagining, is thinking, I pray for the liberation of this person. You can do that, right? Any of those things, but in whatever way works for someone personally, I think is can be helpful. Okay. Yes, June.
It can become contagious too.
It can be contagious. In what way?
In that, if you do it as selflessly as we can, and as really feeling for others, the others feel it, and they think, oh.
Yeah, exactly, right? Other people can feel it, yeah. I think.
That happened in my classroom with all my lawyers.
Oh, what happened specifically?
It really made them, they formed their own little group without telling me.
Hmm.
Ran around rescuing kids.
So your compassion, yeah, your,
Doing it in the classroom.
yeah. So it can be, both the thoughts, both the feelings, and the behaviors can become contagious in a positive way. That's great. Thanks. Hi. Thank you very much.
Two things. One, you mentioned
Right.
So for those three people passing on the road, it would be the least expected.
That's right.
So that the Good Samaritan, so that's an aspect of the story that relates.
Right. That's an aspect of the story that I didn't include, but I'm just repeating it because this is being videoed, so I want to make sure that your comment gets in there. That important part of the story or the parable is the fact that the Samaritan was the person that was most looked down on and most expected not to be assisting. Right? Yeah.
And then I believe you did mention the ego in a slightly different way, but one thing that's occurred to me is on occasion when someone on the surface has compassion for someone, there's the part of the ego like, well, I'm better than that person at least.
Right.
I don't know how to express that, but it's real, it's real.
Right.
And I don't know, you did mention that in a way as like an accomplishment, but it's, I'll have compassion for that person.
Hmm.
And of course, immediately, that makes me better than them.
Right, right. That's what I was trying to suggest as one of the perils, is this idea of that by helping people feel sort of puffed up, and that can feel puffed up, and by ego. So yeah, it's not ego. In this sense, is not exactly the same as in the strict psychological sense of the ego. Here, the ego is more self-focused, investment, self-puffing up. But yeah, certainly that can be, and even people's selectivity in who they want to assist can be associated with the ego too. Like, I'll help, like as in the Good Samaritan story, I'll help this person, but I won't help that person. So it can, right. Any other comments, questions? Yes, hi.
I have a comment. 2 years ago, I used to meet my friend Stereo Discount Store across Angel Street, go between two houses, and occasionally the rear door of the cellar would be unlocked and open. So I would go by just as a natural habit, and I would check the door to see if it was unlocked. If it was unlocked, I'd open the door, turn the lock, and lock the door. 2 years ago, there were Brown University students that were having a party. They saw me check the door. By the time I walked through the parking lot, which was adjacent to where they were, 7 Brown University students surrounded me and confronted me because that apartment had been entered through that door a week before, and their girlfriends lived in the apartment.
Oh, wow.
And so there I was faced with 7 raging Brown University students who honestly felt that they were doing exactly what they should do by protecting their girlfriends. So I thought to myself, how does one handle a situation like this one? They asked me if I knew the landlord, and I was so taken aback by the fact that I was confronted by 7 of them and I was surrounded by them.
Yeah.
I simply looked at them and said, look into my eyes. No, I don't know the landlord. I actually knew them, who I told the story to a couple of weeks later. They looked at me and I said, look into my eyes. I said, if I was going to be a thief and do it in broad daylight, you saw me touch the knob to go into the house, don't you think that I would run? A couple of them looked at me and just stepped back. But there was one who was very aggressive. And I looked at him and I said, all I can tell you is that I'm a good Samaritan. I was just trying to do something that served the greatest good at the highest purpose. He looked at me and he said to me, if I ever see you within 1 mile of this location, I will tear you to shreds. At that point, I realized that I was not going to be able to touch his love. But I figured if I ever crossed his path again, because it wasn't near the end of the graduation season, I figured they were like seniors. When I crossed his path again, which I never did, I was going to simply walk up to him and
Mm.
because I pray for you and all of your friends.
Wow.
That was the place that I had to come to eventually,
Mhm.
because he treated my PTSD. I'm a Vietnam era veteran.
Mhm.
And I had raging thoughts from this person as he was
Mhm.
threatening me as I was walking away. And I said, I need to use my spiritual tools to transcend this, to serve the greatest good and highest
Wow.
good.
That's amazing.
And so I prayed for him.
That goes to show how powerful your spiritual work on yourself and the tools that you have are, that it could just really transform your reaction to the situation like that.
I had to dig deep, though. I have to be
Yeah.
honest.
But the test, I think, is often what we do in the moment. You know, we can think that you were tested in that moment and you had a wonderful response, but the difficulty often is when something we can think, oh, this is what I would do, but when the time comes, it can be very difficult to pull out that reaction.
And Lord, 2 weeks later, I told him the story because I was his friend.
Mhm.
He looked at me and says, do me a favor, keep your hands off the door.
Yeah, right. Well,
So it went from sublime to ridiculous.
right.
I thought I'd share this.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. That's great. And if there's people watching on the live stream, sorry that we couldn't. It was a wonderful tale, and sorry we couldn't repeat that. Hi. Yes.
Hi, question. I didn't have most of the story here, and it reminded me that I have a thought always when I want to hopefully be helpful in a situation
Mm-hmm.
or improve a situation, that it is possible to ask permission to ask first.
Mm-hmm.
If the person is able to respond, you know, would you like help with this? Or
Right.
is this a real need that I'm seeing?
Right.
Because so many times, people are angry, insulted, afraid, and all
Right.
of these things. And, you know, if it's another person that you're trying to help, maybe not a social situation.
It can be a social. I think that's a wonderful suggestion. Is to when you see someone whom you think might welcome your assistance, but you don't know them and you don't know, is to ask. Now, sometimes you might ask, and person might still get angry at you, but that's a very respectful thing to do what you're doing, and can help at least guide the person to be able. The person is making the choice.
I seem to think, just myself, that the asking is an act of compassion.
The asking is right. Asking a person if they would like assistance is an act of compassion in itself. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Anybody else? Anywhere? It's 6 p.m. Chet, would you like to kind of wrap up for us here? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for all the great comments. I really appreciate it. It's really nice to have that. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Donna, for a lively discussion and a thought-provoking topic with many practical hints on how we can apply some of those ideas to developing compassion. While Vishwanath does the offertory, I'll give the announcements for the week. Swami Yogatmananda will be back next week, and the Tuesday and Friday class will go on as usual. Swami is giving the talk next week titled Evolution in Religious Thoughts and Practices. That will be at 5 p.m. on Sunday. There's an upcoming spiritual retreat on Saturday, April 1st from 9:30 to 7 p.m. by Swami Atmajnana Ananda of the Vedanta Center of Greater Washington, D.C. His chosen topic is Remain in Bhava Mukta, or the state of dualistic devotion to your ideal. The registration fee is $20 if registered and paid by March 20th. Other than that, it goes up to $30. So you have a substantial savings by registering early, which gives our folks a chance to plan and get a good estimate of the number of attendees coming. There'll be a receiving line for Donna down in the corner after the oratory, and you're invited for soup supper down in the basement and meditation back here at 7 p.m. With that, I'll do the closing prayer, and then we will have Sri Ramakrishna Arati. May He who is Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Chinese faith, Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest unto us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.